Welcome back to At Mama Feely's Feet, the podcast. I'm your host, Hope Venetta, and I'm a therapist, a writer, and a woman committed to helping us all understand the wounds we carry and the resilience that runs deeper than we know. In our last episode, we talked about why your pain didn't start with you. Today, I want to take that conversation further and get really practical. Because you might be listening and wondering, okay, but how would I even know if I'm dealing with complex PTSD? That's what we're diving in today. What CPTSD actually looks like in daily life. Complex PTSD, or CPTSD, is the result of ongoing persistent trauma, not a single event, but repeated exposure over time. That could be childhood abuse or neglect, systemic racism, domestic violence, or other long-term experiences of harm and instability. What's tricky is that CPTSD doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. It shows up in everyday patterns that can be so normal you don't even realize they're rooted in trauma. In writing this book, I've had to confront not only my own pain, but the pain of my ancestors. The process has been deeply emotional, filled with moments of sorrow and anger, but ultimately hope. I've cried for women who came before me, for the mothers and daughters who endured the unthinkable. They suffered, yet found the strength to press forward. I've cried for myself and for women of my own generation who are still fighting to claim our rightful place in a world that often seeks to erase us. And I've cried for women for tomorrow, wondering if they too will inherit these same burdens. And yet each tear has reminded me that we are all still here, that survival itself is testimony, that in our pain there's also resilience, and in our grief there's also love. But this book is not just about pain. It's also about healing, empowerment, and resilience. It's about reclaiming our heritage and finding strength in our faith. It's about remembering that trauma does not define us. It's part of our story, but it is not the whole story. When we face our wounds honestly, we create the possibility of healing. And when we heal, we make space for a different future for ourselves and for generations that follow. Still, I wrestled with how to speak about trauma without burying us under clinical labels. So people connect with stories, right? Not diagnoses. So let's try a little something. Let me show you what trauma can look like in real life. These aren't textbook symptoms. These are lived realities. The names may not be yours, but the struggles might feel familiar. Tiana. Tiana gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles ached. The engine humming in park. Another argument with her sister. This time it was about whose turn it was to check on Mama. She had just blown up into full-blown rage. The fury had come like fire, hot and sharp. She had screamed, she slammed the door, then she collapsed into shame. Why do I always do this? And her thoughts spiraled. Why can't I just stay calm? With her forehead rested on the wheel, her body trembling, bone weary from an emotional roller coaster she just could not escape. Carla. Carla leaned into the cool granite countertop, her arms trembling from the effort to stay upright. Another wave of nausea gripped her, sharp and sudden. She clutched her stomach and breathed through her teeth. The doctors had run every test. Blood, imaging, specialists always came back to the same conclusion. Well, there's nothing physically wrong with you. But Carla knew better. Her body had always spoken the truth, the truths that she was even too scared to name. As a child, she had flinched at slammed doors, braced herself at the sound of footsteps. That constant fear had lived in her muscles for decades. Now, in her 30s, the fear showed up as migraines, jaw pain, chest tightness. Sometimes that even mimicked a heart attack. She had come to dread the mornings when she awoke to pain before she even moved. Some days, just brushing her teeth felt like pushing a boulder uphill. Her body was a battlefield, still fighting a war long since ended. Serena. Serena sat cross-legged at the edge of her bed, lit only by the blue glow of her phone. The screen buzzed again, another unread message. She stared at it, then turned the phone face down. Her heart filled with guilt, but her fingers still felt frozen. They don't really care, she told herself. They'll leave eventually like everybody else. Her last relationship had unraveled slowly, poisoned by her own doubt. She replayed every fight, every "where are you" text that she'd sent, each time she questioned a harmless glance or a late reply. She knew it was too much, but she couldn't stop. Raised in a house where love had to be earned and stability was a myth, Serena had learned early not to trust joy. Silence felt safer than vulnerability. Distance felt safer than hope. And now, that illusion of safety was suffocating her. Deja. Deja's fingers hovered over the keyboard, unmoving. The words on the screen blurred. A sharp smell, coffee and printer ink, morphed into that of asphalt and sweat. And in an instant, she wasn't in her office anymore. She was 12 again, hiding behind a fence, watching as officers tackled her childhood friend. She saw the boot, the crack of the gun, and the way his body went still. She blinked, but the past clung to her skin like heat. Her breath came in short gasps. The clock on the wall ticked, but she couldn't feel time passing. These moments, they always came without warning. Afterward, she would sit motionless, unsure where she was or who she had become. The trauma wasn't just in her memories. It had taken root in her nervous system. She felt fractured, living a half-life somewhere between yesterday and today. And what about Jasmine? Jasmine's keys jingled in her trembling hand as she yanked open the door. The walls of her apartment felt like they were closing in. The argument with her boyfriend still echoed in her head. Accusations, slammed doors, too many always and nevers. Her heart pounded like it was trying to escape. She didn't think, she just drove. She ended up in the same bar as always, neon lights flickering like sirens. The first drink burned going down. The second numbed her edges. But by the third, she was laughing too loudly and leaning too close to a stranger who smelled like cologne and something dangerous. Every flirtation, every shot was a small rebellion against the emptiness that she carried. But by midnight, the buzz had turned bitter. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror looked like a stranger. "Why do I do this to myself?" she whispered. But the silence had no answer. All of these women sound like women we know and love, right? They might even sound like us. Well, friends, the stories of Tiana, Carla, Serena, Deja, and Jasmine are all descriptions of what complex post-traumatic distress disorder can look like. CPTSD develops when a person's exposed trauma lasts over a long period of time, like we discussed previously. It shows up in so many ways. Intense emotions that feel uncontrollable, difficulty trusting others, physical pain without a clear medical cause, and a body that never seems to rest. African Americans may experience CPTSD at higher rates than other groups because our trauma is both historical and ongoing. The constant strain of systemic racism, discrimination, and oppression creates a pattern of stress that is passed down across generations. It isn't always one traumatic event that breaks us. It's the repetition, the being watched while shopping, the being followed through certain neighborhoods, the being denied opportunities or dismissed when asking for help. These aren't isolated slates. They're patterns of dehumanization. Our trauma is layered. It's personal, shaped by forced migration, stolen land, stolen labor, stolen lives. It's reinforced in modern times by police brutality, medical neglect, wage gaps, food deserts, and school systems that criminalize instead of nurture. None of these realities stand alone. Together, they create a web of chronic injustice that wears down the body, the mind, and the spirit, making us more vulnerable to the weight of CPTSD. When hypervigilance becomes a family trait, when the nervous systems never get to rest, when survival skills are passed from mother to daughter, that's not just stress, that's trauma. Well, there's really no way around it. My book is about CPTSD, but what I want you to know from the beginning, my approach is not about pinning you to a diagnostic label. Too often, what gets stamped as a disorder is actually a logical response to prolonged pressure, pain, or oppression. So think about it a little bit. What if hypervigilance isn't anxiety, but a skill learned from growing up in a world where safety was never promised? What if emotional numbness isn't dysfunction, but a shield carefully built after too many heartbreaks? These responses may look pathological on paper, but in context, they're strategies of survival. The problem is that instead of exploring the story behind our pain, we're too often handed pills without understanding or diagnoses without compassion. We're told what's wrong with us, but rarely in context to what happened to us. That's what this book seeks to change. Because no matter what we carry, rage, grief, shame, exhaustion, we all want the same thing: to be fully seen as human. We don't need a clinical manual that feels detached from our lives. We need a witness. We need truth telling that honors our context. So let's go over this again. Here are some ways that CPTSD might be showing up in your daily life. Hypervigilance, always scanning for danger, unable to relax, feeling on edge, even in safe situations. Overfunctioning, constantly taking care of others, working too much, struggling to rest or say no. Emotional flooding or shutdown, feeling everything all at once or suddenly going numb and disconnected. Difficulty trusting, expecting abandonment, betrayal, or disappointment, even in healthy relationships. Low self-worth, carrying a deep sense of shame, believing you're not good enough no matter what you accomplish. Struggles with identity, feeling rootless, disconnected from who you are or where you come from. Maybe you recognize yourself in some of these. Maybe you've lived this way so long it just feels like that's just who you are. But these aren't flaws. They're survival strategies. They're ways that your body and mind adapted to help you keep going. And here's the part I really want you to hear. If you're nodding along to this list, if you've identified with any of the women that we talked about earlier, this doesn't mean that you're broken. It means that you're surviving. Naming these patterns as CPTSD, though, isn't about putting you in a box. It's about offering clarity and compassion. It's about saying, this is real. You're not imagining it, and you don't have to carry it alone. Understanding how CPTSD shows up in day-to-day life is the first step towards healing. Because once you see the pattern, you can begin to interrupt it. You can notice the hypervigilance and remind yourself, I'm safe right now. You can start setting boundaries around overfunctioning. You can recognize the numbness without shaming yourself for it. And you can begin to anchor yourself through faith, through community, through therapy, anchoring yourself in the truth that you are more than the trauma that you've carried. So, if you've been wondering why life feels so heavy, so relentless, and why your reactions feel out of proportion, maybe it's not just stress. Maybe it's CPTSD. And naming it is the beginning of reclaiming your wholeness. Thank you for joining me today. If this resonates with you, I encourage you to pre-order my book at Mama Feely's Feet, where I go deeper into these stories and offer tools for healing. The link is in the description. Until then, remember, your story matters, your healing matters, and you are not alone.